You're listening to the podcast Back to the Real, and I'm your host, Marcus Tegler. Welcome to the podcast Back to the Real, the podcast that discusses how movies influences us, but also has an impact on us. Today's guest is my friend and colleague Jorunn Joiner, and she's here today to talk about Gothic cinema. Okay, let's do this then. Okay. Hey, Jorunn.
Hi.
Hi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, happy to have you here as a guest as well. So, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
So I have recently graduated from Lund University with a PhD, which I'm very excited about.
Congratulations.
Thank you. In romantic literature, specifically looking at portrayals of Norse culture or Norse mythology in British literature and art from 1760s to 1830. So that was part of the kind of Gothic trend of literature and art at the time.
Wow.
And I focus on it in a kind of ideas about memory and commemoration.
Wow, that sounds really nice.
Yeah, no, it's
cool. How did you come up with the idea? Is it like you have that interest from like for before, of course, but is there something particular that wanted you to make a PhD about this kind of research?
That's kind of why I'm here.
Yeah.
So I started. I mean, I watched a lot of like Gothic films when I was a kid, or like not super young, but a young adult or a teenager. And then I did an English literature degree in the UK, and there was this seminar or course on Romanticism. I thought that looked really cool. And there I was kind of introduced to Gothic literature, like the early Gothic literature, like Anne Radcliffe and Matthew Lewis, who I now make my students read, but also poetry like Coleridge's Christabel and Keats' The Eve of St. Agnes and things like that. And I just fell in love with it. But I think it kind of came from my interest in film when I was doing film studies at the same time.
Yeah.
And then I wrote my BA dissertation on arguably Gothic series called Hannibal.
Such a good TV series. Yeah. It's one of my favorites. Yeah.
Me too. I mean, you say that you shouldn't write your BA dissertations on things you love, but I did, and I do not regret it. It was great.
It's such a great TV series, and I'm just sad that it ended the way it did. I would have been happily seen at least one or two more seasons of it. Yeah.
No, I don't think, unfortunately, it's going to pick up. But it was maybe, there's something as well, like, is it good that it's contained? Like, you never know if it got worse.
No, that's true. That's true. It just felt like it was a TV series that just got better and better every time.
I mean, and the stories were so, like, I felt like they had, like, an arc and everything, But I wrote that, and then I wrote about portrayals of Norse mythology in films, so like Thor and American Gods, the TV show. And then I kind of wanted to go back into romantic literature and the Gothic, so then I did my PhD in literature rather than film, focusing on that kind of strand of the Gothic. Yeah.
Cool. So literature was your main.
It became my main, But I wrote both my BA and my MA focused actually on film. But then now it feels like a lifetime ago since I did film studies, because it's been so much literature in between.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where it came from.
Cool.
Yeah.
Then it feels like it's a very obvious question. What would like to talk about in today's episode? But it feels like you
I would like to talk about Gothic film.
Awesome. But let's dig into that. Because I've seen, several movies that have been inspired, like of the Gothic images and the set designs and stuff like that. So I would be happy to hear more.
What do you think is a Gothic film? Because I think that's like a base question. Like, is there a Gothic genre of films?
I would definitely say there's a Gothic genre, but I would say that there are elements in movies that have a Gothic inspiration. So, one thing I think we talked about it last time we discussed a movie. I got into an argument with my brother. No, not an argument, but we had a little disagreement, basically. We were talking about Christopher Nolan's Batman movies. And which I really like. And he liked them, but he had one big issue with them.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, well, so what? Well, Gotham City looked too clean. And he was like, okay, tell me, yeah, well, the name Gotham, if you look at Tim Burton's Batman, for example, he meant that the buildings or the settings had a very more Gothic design.
Yeah.
And when he said that, I was like, well, you might actually be right.
I would actually agree with him on that. I mean, I also love those films. But
yeah,
I think,
but then when he pointed that out, that was a detail that I didn't think about that much. But then the whole idea, Gotham City, the Gothic images, the set design, everything, just became like a wow moment for me. So I would say more Gothic elements. I've been more. I would say more noticeable for me.
Yeah.
But Gothic movies. But I was thinking like you could maybe have more expertise on that.
I was looking back to prepare for this. I rewatched some of the films I watched when I was really young. So maybe too young. Like The Crow, which I think still holds up. I mean, it's a great film, and arguably I would say seems to have influenced the Batman movies, and that type of vigilante justice in a dark, grimy city. And I think he has maybe been more influential than has been acknowledged. But also something like Interview with the Vampire and these type of supernatural horror.
Also a good movie,
Also a good movie. Horror, but not really scary. And I think that's also something which I was wondering, is that what kind of makes a Gothic film? Is that it's not driving the horror element in the sense that you're there to get scared. You're there to maybe experience other emotions, but it has the same vocabulary as horror, but it just doesn't reach for the same emotional response, perhaps.
So you're saying more about the setting and the mood, that it has more effect.
Or it's maybe draws also on romance and melodrama and these genres which are not there to kind of scare you. They're there to kind of maybe make you think about love or think about death, or maybe the two in combined, which is I think something that Gothic cinema does a lot.
Wow.
Yeah. And then so that was kind of the early stuff, and then I thought about recent Gothic films, and Crimson Peak, Guillermo del Toro's whole film oeuvre, I think is quite Gothic. But then I did think about the new Batman, the 2022 one.
Good that you mentioned that, because that was actually one of the things I was thinking about. It feels like it's a little return back to
because that is so grimy. It's very grunge, and it has the same kind of soundtrack as The Crow as well. I think with not that The Crow had Nirvana, but the same kind of 90s grunge music.
I thought about the interior design of Wayne Tower, for example, as well, where Bruce Wayne resides.
I mean, that's a Gothic mansion, right? Yeah. And the whole dark eye makeup and
maybe a little bit too emo for me.
I enjoy this.
Well, it's not like in the Batman Returns when he reveals himself for Michelle Pfeiffer. You see clearly that he has the black behind the cowl, but then before he removes, suddenly it's all gone, and it's Michael Keaton without the black.
They were consistent when he needs to apply makeup, and I applaud them for bringing that into the film. So I really enjoyed the latest one. I mean, I also loved the Nolan films when I was
absolutely
young. And I still do, but no, that I thought was a bit of a return to a kind of 90s, 2000s grunge Gothic cinema, which is exciting. And I haven't seen The Penguin, but I do want to watch that as well.
Really nice references. Do you have a favorite from which caught your attention early on, like the ones you mentioned?
I think possibly Interview with the Vampire, and I love vampire fiction, and I read a lot of vampire fiction when I was a kid.
Anne Rice novels.
At the Anne Rice novels, and I read Dracula and Twilight because it was that period. Would maybe call it a Gothic film.
Twilight Gothic.
That was. That was a different part of my childhood. But I love vampire films, and I think something like Only Lovers Left Alive is definitely a favorite film, I think that holds up, and it's going to hold up probably for the rest. I want to revisit that film a lot. So,
cool. Do you feel that this is something still very present? You mentioned the Batman, for example, but you feel, is there other movies that you have seen recently where you feel like they still have that kind of inspiration with, it can be the mood, the setting, set design?
I wonder if it's coming back a bit, because what's his name? Robert Eggers is making the Nosferatu movie.
Yes, exactly.
And the new Batman, and you kind of see this like becoming back into the mainstream. And I think one of the argument that has been made about Gothic film is that it was quite mainstream with the Hammer horrors and the Roger Corman stuff in the 60s, and then it became a kind of countercultural, like it fell down a bit. I mean, still were kind of Gothic cinema made, but now maybe it's coming back into really big budget mainstream cinema that is kind of revisiting classical Gothic literature or drawing on that aesthetic, which I think is, it's not that difficult to, you know it when you see it, right?
Yeah.
Like, but it's maybe difficult to define what exactly is the Gothic aesthetic.
Exactly. But it's very interesting what you started with, because for me it's a bit tricky to say, for example, that movie is like a Gothic movie.
See, that's
having it as like a genre or a label on a movie. To me, that's a bit tricky, because it can contain elements, but what qualifies it as a pure Gothic movie would be interesting. So, do you have any thoughts about that? Or?
I read, to prepare for this as well, I read a book called Gothic Cinema by Xavier Saldana Reyes, and he argues that it's an aesthetic mode rather than a genre, or that the genre is an aesthetic mode rather than horror, which is about a kind of emotional effect, and therefore it's maybe more contained by its visual or iconographic elements, which I would agree with, I think. And it has been historically connected to horror a lot, and that it's a subgenre of horror. It's a part of horror movies. That I feel like it needs to be maybe negotiated a little bit when you have movies that are not scary at all, or that maybe goes more into melodrama or those genres, like I don't know, Jane Eyre. It could arguably consider Gothic because it draws on classic Gothic literature, but it's obviously not a horror. Hopefully.
No, exactly. No, but I was thinking when you spoke about having literature as the source material, for example, and you mentioned American Gods. That is Neil Gaiman, and thinking H.P. Lovecraft.
Is that Gothic, or is that like, what's it called, like cosmic horror? Because that's another thing, right?
Cosmic horror. That's a bit new.
I think it's. I'm not a huge expert on Lovecraft stuff, so I don't want to say anything completely wrong. But it's a lot about the space. And like these huge monsters, and
yes, exactly.
More towards science fiction, perhaps.
It might be, exactly. And but I was thinking, I haven't read that much Lovecraft, but I've seen more like some TV series that were made, and so it feels like it's leaning into horror. But then at the same time, it's more like setting the mood. This, like you talked about, like the setting is feel like both the settings makes it a bit uncomfortable and a bit extra moody.
So maybe it's a similar kind of relationship to horror. And I mean, Gothic historically has been about, I mean, it drew on chivalric romances and the medieval literature to begin with, and that's kind of where it came from. So it's often been about the past haunting the present, or something about set in historical times, or the past coming back in some form, whether that be, ghosts or vampires or mummies or whatever. So it's a kind of historical genre in some sense, rather than a science fiction. But that certainly has the kind of similar relationship to horror. And I don't want to be too bold to say that Gothic literature is obviously like a kernel to what would become horror later on. I mean, this was in the 18th century.
Exactly. That's actually a follow-up question I have. Your thoughts, or what do you think about horror, for example?
I'm not a huge horror watcher, which is, I think, ironic. I don't watch a lot of horror movies.
Exactly. I would like to remember that we talked about this. So
I'm really easily scared, actually.
Okay.
So I've avoided a lot of the things that I know will freak me out. So I don't watch a lot of ghost movies or horror movies that have ghosts in them, because they scare me so much.
So it's the supernatural a bit that freaks you out?
Like I love Silence of the Lambs, and I think that's a great film, and that doesn't freak me out much. But something like Paranormal Activity, I know I would not sleep.
I
think it's also, I mean, from a personal perspective, it's interesting because I love Gothic cinema, but I struggle with horror.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's some disconnect there.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say it's a disconnect, but I think there's elements that you find very intriguing and very exciting, maybe. But then there's maybe the elements of horror that terrifies you,
Yeah,
maybe
exactly.
scares you. So maybe the Gothic is a better balance with that aspect.
Yeah. I think it's somewhere maybe safer. I mean, it doesn't challenge you as much perhaps as horror does emotionally, and it maybe draws more on that kind of aesthetic of the sublime that the 18th century literature wanted to kind of achieve, which was oppositional to horror. So it was supposed to kind of make you feel awe and terror in equal measure, but from a distance, like you were slightly detached, and you can kind of see the beauty in violence rather than feel this kind of visceral reaction, which is more maybe what horror wants to achieve, which is, you know, a interesting emotion to experience in itself, but they maybe want to achieve different emotional spectrums for films. But I don't know how much of films go into that type of literary theory. I mean, I argued that Hannibal, the show, kind of drew on the Kantian sublime, and that, you know, they made murder into this kind of art, like the murder scenes were almost sculptural, right?
Exactly. I was actually thinking about asking you about that as well, because that was one thing I remember when I was watching that TV series, because like you said, I mean, it's like several serial killers, at least in the first season, that have victims that get, as you remember, get killed in very bizarre ways. But like you said, there was almost like an art to it as well, the way it was portrayed in some of the episodes. And I remember one particular episode with the glass, with one of the agents getting, To me, that was like, it was horrifying, but at the same time, I was so fascinated about the creativity behind it and how it was shown in the TV series as well.
And I think it's so bizarre, like it's so abstracted from any crime that we can imagine actually happening, that it detaches us maybe a little bit extra from ever thinking that this would happen in real life. Like my favorite is the man in the tree with the flowers. I think, it's beautiful in a way.
It is beautiful in a way, but as you said, it's terrifying at the same way. And finding that balance, it feels like it makes it, you get fascinated, but then you get terrified. The same way.
Or maybe terrified at your own fascination of this,
exactly,
right? Like,
exactly.
Should I actually enjoy
Am I really
this?
allowed to enjoy this? I'm feeling that this is okay.
Yeah, and maybe that's where Gothic becomes challenging. Like, is it challenging our boundaries of what we think is like beautiful, or where do we draw the line of something that we enjoy pleasurably? Can we look at, you know, a person getting chopped up into little pieces and think that this is, you know, art?
No, you're right. You're right. But like I said before, that TV series still fascinates me still today. Sometimes it happens I rewatch some of the episodes, especially the first season, because. And especially Mads Mikkelsen as Hannibal Lecter.
Fantastic,
he's so fantastic, I would say, as well. So I haven't seen any in that genre, that kind of TV series, in the way it's been portrayed and in the setting. And like you said, you had lots of source material that you could use for future seasons and episodes.
Absolutely, No, it's a shame. I mean, I watched Brian Fowler's other series, Pushing Daisies, and American Gods, of course, but... Pushing Daisies is kind of like the comic version of Hannibal in some sense. Like it's the colours are brighter and it's less kind of dark and gloomy, but the same detachment to the bizarre deaths are there. But I think Hannibal does something so interesting with that kind of challenge of what type of series it is as well. Because, I mean, it's a crime procedural, which is, and that's something I was kind of looking into when I was writing about it, that like it's a genre which has tended to have kind of been seen as lowbrow or cheap productions, and there's a lot of crime procedural dramas obviously out there, but it's trying to do something else. And there was a quote from some of the filmmakers or the TV makers saying, like, we're not trying to make a crime procedural, we're trying to make pretentious art film from the 80s. And I thought that was a really interesting way to go about making a crime procedural.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it also, maybe the Gothic aesthetic was a way
Yeah.
to elevate it to being something that could be argued to be more highbrow than just a crime procedural.
Absolutely. But I was thinking about the visuals there, but then referring to, you mentioned American Gods, for example. I was thinking of Neil Gaiman. Correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm thinking about The Sandman.
Yes, which I haven't seen.
I haven't seen it either, but I remember that
Yeah.
there was lots of talk about it being, of course, good, but also the setting and the style of it, and having those Gothic vibes as well.
I can imagine. I started reading the comics like back in the day, but I got really scared. so I cut that out.
So I'll edit this out. Next chapter.
So I closed that and returned it to the library.
There are pages missing. Cool. But speaking of, since your biggest interest is in literature as well, have you recently read some literature that's been recently released that is and talks about becoming like, this could be a good movie, for example, or is this setting?
I read so little modern literature. Like, if you ask me about anything written in the UK from 1760 to 1830, I will be able to recommend you stuff.
Yeah.
Any new things I'm not great at, but they are doing a new Frankenstein adaptation. I think Guillermo del Toro are, so that's I'm very excited about. Yeah, I think that. That I'm very excited for. I saw the old one with Kenneth Branagh, which is great in its own way, but I'm looking forward for a remake.
The Branagh version is very cool. It was a bit different. I remember when I saw it first, it was a bit different when it came out, but I liked the setting, and especially having Kenneth Branagh doing it as well, and also directing
Is it Robert De Niro who's the monster?
He's the monster, that's right. And even that, with the casting there, I was like, whoa.
It's something else.
It was different than Frankenstein Unbound, if you've seen that one.
No, I haven't seen
that one. I'll send you a link.
Yeah,
it's a very interesting movie. It's a bit more sci-fi, but then it's about I'll tell you later. It's a very special reference to Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster.
Is that the one with, that's not the
John Hurt.
John Hurt, okay. It's not the Gene Wilder comic.
No, exactly. Louis is a researcher that realizes his research has been sending things back in time, and by accident he comes back in time to England when I won't spoil too much, but he comes into the setting where Frankenstein's monster is lurking about, and so he comes into that setting and meets the author of she gets inspired to write about Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster.
So she's not the agent of that creation anymore. Okay.
But I'll send you the link.
Please do.
But if I put it this way, if you have literature that you've read that so far hasn't been made into a movie, do you have any novel that you can, on the top of your mind, think that this could be a really cool movie that could be a good setting with the Gothic?
I think they're difficult to make. I mean, I would intrigued to see what someone would make of something like Anne Radcliffe's The Italian. Mm-hmm. I don't know how easily that is translatable into a film. No. Similar with something like Horace Walpole's drama, The Mysterious Mother, which I haven't read, but I've read the synopsis, and it sounds extremely. I think it would be extremely controversial because it has a lot of taboo topics like double incest and all these things that are and matricide, I think. Themes which in the 18th century is kind of like standard of the Gothic. But today I wonder also how would you translate that into a commercially viable film?
You're right.
Similarly with The Monk, there is an adaptation, but it actually removes all of the supernatural aspects of the novel, and it removes not all of the incest and taboo topics, but it kind of puts that on the down low. So I would like to see one that just like fully goes for it. That would be exciting, but I wonder who would dare to do that.
Can we come up with well, it's not Nolan. Thinking of which director, but you mentioned Guillermo del Toro, actually.
He could do it.
I think he, on the top of my mind, it might be since his former track record of movies he's been making so far. He has a very special style, especially.
Yeah, and I think he has like the right. I mean, he is, I think, a Gothic director in the sense that he has a lot of sympathy for the monster, and his films are horror adjacent, but it's always about human horror.
Yes.
Like the horrific acts are always the human.
Exactly.
And the supernatural can be even comforting, or they can help you, or it's a setting, but it's not what drives the emotional fear in his films. Right. And I think that's the type of, I mean, that's also like an emotional wavelength that I think works with, or is kind of Gothic.
I was about to ask you about that as well, because to me that's also been a thing, especially when it comes to Guillermo del Toro, that you have the monsters and then you have the humans as well, and how the humans always, in some point or some way, become the bad people. They're actually being the antagonists in the movies. And if he's trying to say something, if it has something to like the setting or current current situations going on in the world, or if it's like a how do you say? I'm trying to find the word. No, like critical comments about societies, for example.
And that's I think both Gothic and horror do that. Or if Gothic is horror, then but depending on how that's I think one of the strengths of those genres of that genre is that they always respond to society in some sense.
That was the word I was searching for. Social commentary.
Yes,
so and how. That's very effectful, and it's very visible in his movies, I would say, as well.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's like, it's a characteristic of horror as well, that horror tends to mirror what's happening in society at the moment. I think like right now we're seeing a lot of, I was reading something that we were seeing a lot of birth scenes, or very grotesque birth scenes, and that obviously resonates with something that's going on in the US at the moment.
Yes.
And I think Gothic has historically, as a literary genre, also done that, and the films as well. But Guillermo del Toro, I think one thing that he always shows is the kind of humanness of those kind of horrible things happening in the real world, that it's human emotions and humans that drive that, and it's not some grotesque evil, it's misplaced anger, or it's emotions that are ugly, that are putting other people in these horrible situations, and it's a kind of exploration of how monstrous are we as people.
I think it was a Pan's Labyrinth. That felt like that was very obvious in that movie. And it was very, very detailed. I would say very like in your face almost about the cruelty of humans.
Absolutely,
and behavior.
Yeah, but also The Shape of Water, I think, is an allegory for a lot of things, and the true evil, or the horror comes from society, but also from agents within that society. So it's not just some nameless or faceless person, right?
You're putting a picture.
So maybe that's something that Gothic cinema does. It like puts the humans in the monstrous position.
This is very intriguing, actually. So, can you, on top of your mind, come up with other movies that you feel like represent what we just talked about?
That's a good question. I think that's why I like modern vampire films, not Twilight.
Sure?
I like Twilight actually, but not for this reason. But I think it also usually those types of monsters, and particularly the vampire, explores like the extents of our monstrosity, and they are monsters that kind of like mirror maybe the uncomfortable parts of ourselves, or how far would we take certain desires, like to live forever? What would we trade? Or where are our boundaries drawn towards other people? And I think something like that Interview with the Vampire and Anne Rice novels, I think, do that, but also other vampire films, and
Cool.
Yeah.
But I mentioned we talked about Guillermo del Toro, for example. Now, but I just can't remember the name. A British director we talked about.
Robert Eggers.
Robert Eggers, but there was
yeah.
another one, Williams, who did. We talked about he made a rock musical Tommy, but
Ken Russell.
Ken Russell, thank you. Williams, where did I get that from? Sorry, but remember when we talked about it, then suddenly I realized, oh my, I've seen some of the movies, and a very very particular style, and as I understood from you, that could be considered as Gothic.
Well, he made the movie Gothic.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
And I mean that's about the creation of Frankenstein. That summer night in 1816. When Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein and John Polidori wrote The Vampire as a competition with Lord Byron and Percy Bysshe Shelley. It's like this almost mythological event in like romantic scholarship now. And that event is the basis of that film, and then it goes into different directions. But I mean that's, I guess, an exploration in kind of the origins of the Gothic. That maybe I haven't seen any of his other films, so I don't know how that kind of resonates with the other stuff he's made. But I've heard that he has a very particular style.
He has a very particular. I've only seen a couple of movies, but especially Tommy. But that's a completely different, because it's a rock musical.
But I mean, that's not maybe too dissimilar.
No, when I think about it, no, it might not actually be it, because it's based on music by The Who. And you have like artists like Tina Turner, you have Elton John in it. There's an incredible cast as well. I think even Jack Nicholson is in it, and he sings.
Oh wow, that is
maybe not the best, but it's a very intriguing movie, especially with the way it's made and the style, and it's quite cruel and horrifying as well. I don't know if you know this story, but the main character Tommy, he's both deaf and blind, but he has this amazing talent for playing pinball machines.
What a story!
And that's amazing stories, and that's how they built the idea of the musical, and it built upon his story. And to me, that's maybe not Gothic, but then the setting and the mood, especially with his disabilities, and how people treat him and how they behave towards him, because he has an evil stepbrother that is very mean to him. I won't spoil it if you're watching the movie, but it does very, very evil things to him in the movie as well. And it's like finding the balance, like you said before, with the horror, and then like the things like you sitting, like you feel uncomfortable watching them, and then doing this like kind of rock musical song at the same time.
Maybe it's a bit like that kind of playing with taboo, which is also things that Gothic does a lot, like literature and I think films as well, that, you know, where do we draw, like, can we step over this line and make a movie about a disabled person who's experiencing horrible things, but also make it a musical? And I don't know how, was that an uncomfortable viewing experience?
It was, I mean, I enjoyed it. I mean, for example, the song he starts singing, it starts with, "We're all alone, cousin, all alone, cousin. Let's think of a game to play. Now the grown-ups have all gone away." And then the horror starts. So yeah, it's a bit, today's standard might be a little bit dated, but at the time it was like, okay. And then you just see him like shoving him down the toilet and stuff like, and says, "What would you do if I did this to you?" And it's like,
it's terrible. Poor guy.
It's terrible. So then thinking about the director, and then how he has done other movies in that setting, that kind of mood, and especially that makes you become not uneven, but feel a bit uncomfortable.
Feel a sense of unease.
Yes, exactly.
But I wonder what it is that we feel unease about.
Yes,
right?
That's what I find so interesting and fascinating.
Because is it what we see, or is it that we're sitting there watching it? And where do we place that unease? Is it within ourselves, or are we angry, or not angry, but are we feeling uncomfortable about anyone who made this film?
Exactly.
And I think that's a question everyone has to ask themselves.
Absolutely. But then at the same time, you mentioned that earlier, but I still get so intrigued by these kinds of settings, especially the stories and the settings and the style in particular.
You're drawn in, right?
I'm drawn into it. And then as I feel uncomfortable when maybe some scenes, then I feel fascinated at the same time. I can't stop watching.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned the question, it's like, am I supposed to be uncomfortable, or am I supposed to be okay? Is this okay for me to watch and enjoy at the same time? For me, that's very, very fascinating.
Yeah, and you kind of get drawn into this world, and now you're here, so like you might as well sit and enjoy it. But what do we get out of? Like, what do we take away when we finish the film? Or like, have we taken out a lesson from this experience?
What have you learned from this?
It's every film is a pedagogical experience. No, absolutely not.
Especially those.
Especially those very controversial taboo ones that have aged really badly. No.
Cool, but this might be a little bit of a tricky question. But I was thinking, do you have any thoughts about where you can see like Gothic movies moving into the future? For example, I was just thinking about, for example, how AI has been talked about a lot recently, and about creating images and ideas from using AI. I was just thinking what the future holds for like Gothic images.
I wonder if AI is going to get into that. I mean, I think AI creates very shiny images. And Gothic kind of, I think the aesthetic, I mean, apart from kind of playing with the Gothic architecture like Victorian houses and cast iron grates and stuff, it also plays on imperfection. And the kind of decayed and the destroyed a little bit. And I wonder how AI will reproduce that. And I think one of the new films I'm really looking forward to is a film called Le Veau d'Alac, which is a French film about a vampire.
Surprise.
And it's filmed on like 16mm camera. It's like really grainy. The vampire is a puppet. So it's all like stop motion. It's very handmade. And I wonder if that's where it's going to go. Like, you know, if you want to really show that sense of decay and not the grotesque, but maybe, you know, challenge artistic ideals and aesthetic norms, then that maybe you need to go even further into the analog.
Exactly, going back more to practical contra,
practical effects,
CGI, for example.
Maybe more like stop motion animations, like what we saw with Nightmare Before Christmas ages ago, right? And going back to that type of stuff.
I think Tim Burton, for example, still uses. I think he used it even in the new Beetlejuice movie as well. So to me, that's an art form in itself. I mean, it's barely not being used, but he's still one of the greats that's still implemented in modern movies as well. So
and I think the Gothic aesthetic is really welcome into that slightly imperfect, where it doesn't maybe always work, or you know, it doesn't look real, but because it's also, I think, a genre that draws a lot on melodrama and kind of the theatre tradition. That you can suspend your disbelief enough for the doll to work, or you know, you can see the grains in the camera, and it kind of adds to it rather than deflects. And I think aesthetically, one of my favorite kind of genres of Gothic cinema is like 1970s Czechoslovakian movies, because I think they get the aesthetic perfectly, and it's grainy, and the costumes are so, but I mean, it works so beautifully well, I think, and it's slightly surrealist, and it's grotesque, but it's also incredibly beautiful, and it has that kind of dream-like theatrical quality that I think you almost need to have. You need to have a human imperfection to be able to do it.
That's a good point. Nice. But I have to ask you, off top of your mind, could you list like 3 favorite movies or that you can recommend as well?
I can recommend, if I do the Czechoslovakian ones, Valerie and Her Week of Wonders, which is unsurprisingly a vampire film. If I can do only vampire films. I think that one.
Something to sink your teeth in.
Yeah, exactly. Only Lovers Left Alive, I think, is like a cool modern Gothic film. Jim Jarmusch's, and I think...
Was it with Tilda Swinton?
Tilda Swinton and Tom Hiddleston.
Yeah. I've only seen snippets of it. I haven't seen the entire movie.
I find it like it's very aesthetically cool, and kind of draws on that type of music that Jim Jarmusch is famous for, like the Nick Cave gang. But it's a vampire film about love and, you know, lasting love throughout the ages, and how do you live with that. If I do an old one, I really enjoy something like Cat People from 1940s.
Okay, so not the 80s version.
Not the 80s version. That is, I guess, a horror, but I think it has the Gothic elements in
Yes.
it as well. I haven't seen the 80s one,
No,
actually.
it's very special. It's like a Bruckheimer production as
Okay,
well. So
yeah, no.
but Malcolm McDowell is in it, so that's always a good thing.
Yeah, no, I could watch that. But yeah, maybe those three. They're a bit of an odd gang.
And
But
I wouldn't say that. I think it's really good.
Yeah.
Yes. But it feels like I have to do some studying now. I really do put some movies on the watch list as well, because that's why I enjoy doing this podcast as well, because I feel like I learn so much more from people that interview as well, and it gives me so much more knowledge about. There's so many movies that are out there.
Yeah, and I need to put that Tommy on my watch list. I really need to watch that.
I can't be responsible if you watch it afterwards and you feel like you might find it fun, you might find it a bit tacky, I don't know.
But that's also like, I kind of enjoy films that are a bit, not cringe, but a bit tacky or a bit kitsch.
It is very over the top, but at the same time, that's what fascinated me, especially when you hear the song "The Pinball Wizard."
Yeah,
that's Elton John singing, and he's standing like on stilts,
amazing,
2-3 meters up, and it has this incredible, cool rock song playing. He's a pinball wizard. It has to be a twist. A pinball wizard.
That's incredible.
So when you watch it, I think you're going to be. Intrigued, but maybe if you're going to like it, I don't know.
I kind of enjoy when like it's a bit like you see someone has really put their heart and soul into this, and, and you're kind of like, okay, yeah.
So they made an effort.
They made an effort, and I don't want to say that it's embarrassing. I mean, you're sitting there watching it, so like now we're part of it as well. So.
Oh, I think it's so fun. But no, it's a very interesting genre.
And I think it is a genre, I would say.
Like you said, maybe a sub-genre, if it's just more correct maybe to say.
Or an aesthetic genre, or something that's maybe heavily going into the visual elements of the film rather than, maybe it draws on other genres structurally and thematically or emotionally, but visually you can kind of tell, perhaps. That this is a Gothic film.
Yeah. Cool. So you mentioned that you're looking forward to seeing some movie coming out now. So do you have on your wish list, like you would like to see? I know we mentioned very briefly before, but do you have something that you really like to see in the cinema, or like what you could
of the ones that are coming out soon? Yeah. I would love to see the Vordelak in cinema. I don't know where it will show. I think I'll be hard pressed to find that one.
Like arrange a special screening for it.
What was the ones that we talked about? The Frankenstein one?
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to that. I'm also looking forward to, I think the next one that I will see is Eggers' Nosferatu, which is coming out pretty soon.
I'm actually looking forward to that one, because the Nosferatu from the 20s is one of my favorite horror movies.
It's a great film.
It's so fascinating still today, and it was actually filmed in the German town of Wismar, where some of my family comes from as well. Yeah. So recently when I was there, I just realized, this is where they shot the movie.
With the staircase.
Exactly. And then especially in the harbor when the ship arrives. So they actually had plaques on the floor saying this is where this and this scene was shot.
Yeah,
and so,
it's a really cool film. I haven't seen the later one with Klaus Kinski, but I think the 1920s is like in my mind. I'll keep that one pristine.
That you should do, but also recommendation if you really enjoy that. They made a movie with John Malkovich and Willem Dafoe, The Shadow of the Vampire, and it revolves around the making of Nosferatu, and had this theory, not the theory, but there was a rumor going that the actor who played Nosferatu, that he was a vampire for real. And then you have so you're playing around with the thing: is he a vampire or is he just acting very, very convincing?
It's a very unique look for a vampire.
So that would be a recommendation for me if you enjoy it.
I will watch that definitely. Yeah,
it has a very special style to it as well.
Yeah, and I think I'm really looking for. I mean, I enjoy Eggers' visual style. I think I mean, The Witch is great, and The Lighthouse is, I think, one of my favorite films, which I know not everyone is a huge fan.
No,
but
a very cool style you've said about having a movie filmed on 16 millimeter, for example.
Yeah.
I really like this grainy approach to it. It makes it more like it's filmed on like a film cell.
Yeah, and I don't know if he always
roll.
uses real film, but it feels like it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
At least using a technique that looks very similar to it.
And I've seen the trailer of Nosferatu, and it looks very promising, and it also feels kind of classically Gothic in that it feels like a literary adaptation.
And it also has Willem Dafoe.
It also has, which is a huge plus. I will watch it for him.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, Joe, I think maybe wrapping it up now. Any last thoughts or comments?
No, thank you for having me. It's been great to talk
thank
about
you for being here.
Some Gothic films I haven't talked about forever. So
I find this very, very fascinating and very intrigued by it. So I think we might have to do it like a follow-up or something.
That would be great.
Maybe we can do it, especially after the movies we talked about have come out, and we can then talk back and see if we comment on them and see what we thought.
Do we think they're aesthetically Gothic? Do we think there are themes about the monstrous in humans or the unease in ourselves? Do they follow up on those things? Yeah.
I like what you're thinking.
Yeah.
I think we should do that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching the podcast. If you enjoyed what you were watching, please remember to hit like and subscribe. It helps me with the channel and it helps me create more content. See you next time.